We're live.
They just want to be like,
yeah.
hey.
There we go.
We always look so awkward when we start these because we're like, are we really? Is it rolling, Bob?
Ta-da. Happy late Easter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hello.
It's like 2 weeks past Easter.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm good.
All right, so I think we're going to need to move this a little bit closer. Let's see.
Oh, just intimate.
YouTube's thing is a little bit different. That's good. Hey, just 3 of us today. How's it going, everybody? It's April, what is it?
I
14th.
don't know, but I was about to answer, how's it going? I was about to be like,
It's
going
going
pretty
good.
well.
Yeah,
It's
good.
it's going
Glad
well.
we're all good. Are you good?
I'm good, yeah.
Are you good? It's April 14th of 2024.
Yeah.
And since last month it wasn't quite Easter, we talked about luck.
I feel like I'm huge, babe.
Girl.
I feel like it's just very close to me.
Is that
I
better?
scoot forward.
Oh yeah,
There we
perfect.
go.
Now
Now I just have to sit
you
up.
don't look like you're like far away. Okay.
Anyways, so how's it going?
I already said that.
I know.
I know. If only people would respond.
Yeah.
Someday they will. Someday we'll get on here and
Yeah.
chat with
Yeah.
people. But so we were thinking about what we wanted to talk about, and we drove last weekend, a few short days
Yeah.
ago, to the path of totality of the most recent solar eclipse,
It was the April 9th eclipse.
April 8th. Monday,
Right.
April 8th.
We
drove-
Led into
We
the
drove
night.
into the 9th.
Yes, we
To get
definitely
home.
did. We drove to, so we live in North Carolina. We drove to the far side of Nashville, spent the night, and then the next day we got up and drove
3 hours.
3 hours to
Should have only
Paducah.
been like an hour. And a
No,
half.
it should have been 2.
Yeah.
2.
It
Yeah.
only
So
took
it was an
one.
extra
It
hour.
only took one extra.
It took
Only
hour.
one extra hour.
50%. It took 50% longer, and that's the key
Hey.
indicator.
Yeah.
So-
trend.
It took us 3 hours to go
No.
what should have been 2 hours, and then we got there and got set up and watched the thing. It was really cool.
It was, yeah, probably.
It was amazing.
probably one of like the most amazing events of my life.
Yeah. I think it was the second time that I spontaneously cried because of nature.
Only
Yeah.
the second time.
I feel like
Yeah.
it's got to be more for
Do you
you.
remember the first?
It was at that garden, right?
I was like bawling my eyes out. Remember when we walked into the National Arboretum
No.
and they had the
It was a giant flower, right?
Oh
what's
yeah.
that flower
Yeah,
called?
yeah, the corpse flower or whatever.
Yeah. It's not the corpse flower. It's the other one that's like real tall.
I thought it
But
was supposed
also
to smell
stinky.
like rotting meat.
The corpse flower, I think is, or maybe it is. One of them's like the giant red one.
Yeah.
And then there's the like real tall one. It was that one. It was the real tall one.
Yeah.
I was.
But they've bred them so they're not quite as stinky, and then they like bloom more regularly.
Yeah, they've bred them to bloom more regularly.
Or they like
and
figure that like they have like the
they have a bunch of them in a warehouse, not in a warehouse, but in a
yeah, it's like a
in
controlled
in
environment.
a controlled
so they can
environment, and then
project.
when they see that they're going to bloom, they bring them out, and so it happens a lot more often than it used to.
Well, you can just see them; it's available.
Yeah, because
But I had no idea it was there, so we just walk in and
and it was like right in front of us, and it was huge.
Oh my
and
gosh.
it was gorgeous. It was really amazing.
yeah, it literally took my breath away. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And then I was crying and couldn't stop crying because it was so amazing. And then all these people are just like
Yeah.
going to the thing. It was kind of funny.
I think that's the thing about Revelation, though, is like it's very personal.
Yeah.
Like you were being struck by something that was very personal to you, and like even though I could understand intellectually why you were having a reaction, I wasn't having the same. I wasn't
Yeah.
struck.
You
the
weren't
same way.
experiencing the same thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and no one is, we're all having our own experience all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I think that we can collectively have a similar experience,
hmm
but I don't know that we collectively have the same.
No.
I don't think we ever have the same experience. It was a neat collective experience, though. We were at a park, in Kentucky, and it took a long time. Like it started getting
Yeah.
dimmer, and then it
Very
happened very
progressive.
And then
very
the sunlight
slowly.
wasn't warm, and then you could see
Started to
shadow,
get-
like
yeah, the light
shadows on the
came,
ground.
the
Yeah,
strobing.
It was
yeah.
That was cool.
It was perfect, I think, because while there were a lot of people, so there was this collective energy, which was really neat. It was also, we were still all spread out because it
Yeah.
was such a huge park.
Yeah.
So you didn't feel cramped,
Mm-hmm.
but you still felt that collective energy.
Yeah. When the eclipse started to like fully
The moment.
moment it went dark.
Because we're all
We
watching
all
it with our
started
glasses,
clapping, and
yeah.
that was really cool to feel this like
And I
shared
think,
experience
yeah.
with a bunch of different people.
And I think that clapping is like the crying, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, you want to emote.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And maybe we're not all criers. But that like, hey,
Yeah.
we
Well-
want to share a like physicality of
Yeah.
what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I
unless
was one of the criers.
unless you've seen it, it's very difficult to put into words, which is why I think people go through the trouble and expense to see multiple ones, because it's
Oh, I
very
want to see another
it's
one.
very short. It's very short, and it was like maybe 2 minutes of totality. And the second that the last ray of sun is gone, and you're just looking at the black disc with the huge corona around it, you can take your glasses off, and it's
No, you're
like,
supposed to wait 20 seconds, babe.
well, I didn't, but I'm not having any
Oops.
vision issues, but
I think it takes anyway, I'm sure you're fine.
it was very surreal. It was very surreal. Like the corona around the sun is huge and really just gorgeous, but it's so dark. Like if you look around, it's like as dark as night. But
No shadows.
all around the
Yeah.
horizon,
Yeah.
it looks like twilight. Like there's a
Yeah.
little bit of light, because it's not totality there. Like you can see past where it's
Right.
totality.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw someone explaining that if you're at a very high place, you can actually watch the shadow move
my
across the
gosh.
ground.
Oh, let's do that next time.
Let's do that next
Do
time.
that.
And you can see it come and
Oh
be
my
over you,
gosh.
and you can actually watch the shadow
Oh my
move
God.
all the way
Okay,
across.
I totally pictured where we would do this, but I don't know if there's just going to be a...
Well, the next one's in 2044, so we've got 20 years to figure it out.
Yeah, next
Well,
one.
no,
In the United States.
No, I was imagining being
Iceland.
at Jackson Hole.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
when we were up on that thing
Lookout
watching the
Mountain thing.
sunset?
Signal Mountain.
And like
wasn't
being
it
able
called?
to see.
Which one?
Yeah. Jackson, Wyoming, when we were
We
down
drove
at
to the Tetons and
Tetons,
went
yeah.
to see the sunset.
Yes.
where we went up high.
Yeah.
There's some
yeah,
crazy
yeah. I thought that was
animal-
Signal Mountain.
Yeah, I think it's Signal Mountain. Anyway,
We went to
that
see
it
a lot of
was
sunsets.
it's so
It's amazing.
it's really intense.
Oh. Okay, so I just had this thought. I don't know, you guys have probably already been talking about this. I've been outside enjoying the gorgeous day. But so there's no shadows.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no warmth from the sun. Like
It
know,
gets
it's a
noticeably
temperature
colder.
that it is outside,
Yeah.
but there's no. I mean, when you stand in the sun versus when you stand in the shade, right? So there's no sun on you. There's no warmth on you. There's no shadows on you, but you can kind of tell that there's light all around, right? But then, the moment any sliver of the sun appears,
Yes.
it's like instantaneous. You feel it on your skin.
Yeah.
You
The world instantly gets
yeah, I
brighter.
mean
It
it
gets
progressively got
significantly-
cooler, but like the difference, and then like the shadows and everything. So like, I think that's kind of how it is spiritually, right? Like I think there's a similar thing that happens spiritually where it's like you see the spirituality around you, but it's not hitting you.
Mm.
And then it hits you and it's so drastically different. And then there's levels of that. Like there's that beginning part, and then there's like progressively getting warmer, and then there's like serious shadows. Anyway, just
That's
interesting.
really interesting. That is. Very cool. I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah, I didn't think, just because we're doing Sunday best and
Yeah.
spirituality and metaphors, but even when the sun's hidden, you know it's there, right?
Oh,
Like,
you know it's there. 'Cause
it's
you look up
still
in the
so
sky and you
clear.
see
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. You're not like, oh, there's a big black spot. You're like, oh, something's hiding.
Yeah.
Hmm. It was wild. It's very, very hard to put into words.
It is.
But I definitely see why, like, we definitely saw East Asian tourists by the bus, like by the van load. Like, you know, they clearly had flown from somewhere, Japan, China, I don't know. But, like, you know, and it's so fast
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's like as soon as
You have
it's
to do it
over,
again to like
as soon as it's over, you want
Yeah.
to see it again.
process.
Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that's the thing about it is it's like it's so totality. So in 2017 we had a 80% solar
Oh, yeah,
eclipse
it was
here, and
significant.
you know we all saw it with our glasses and everything, and it was
like that
neat
again
and
this
cool,
year.
and it
I
got
think it was
dim.
Yeah.
pretty
But-
significant.
That is nothing like totality. Like it's
No,
just
not
not
even
even
close.
close. Like
Yeah.
when people tell you that, if you've never seen it, like it's really true. Like the totality is a totally different experience because you
Yeah.
can look directly at the sun and it's just a black circle with a incredible like rays of energy coming off.
And it's not like the pictures. I mean, because it's everything. It's how you feel. It's the temperature. It's the heat of the light. It's the energy that happens with every.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, with nature. I mean, I'm sure that even if there weren't other people there, there'd be
Yeah.
an energy of nature, of the animals that are responding and the plants that are responding. Yeah, and the like the strobing effect before, like
Yeah.
I just don't like. I think I've often thought this. I think it's the difference between like hearing music and then going to see a live concert. It's a different,
Oh, like a recording of music
yeah,
versus like being in the room with all those instruments.
with the
It's
person who's playing,
totally
like
different.
their energy and their like
Well, they're
presence
they're
and-
moving the airwaves around your body and your ears in a way that a recording could never capture. Like a recording
Right.
is putting it through a very narrow filter of microphones and then back out through a very narrow filter of speaker.
Speakers.
Whereas in real life, there's so many more waves of sound and they're all hitting you and they're bouncing
Oh,
around the room.
and there's a
it's-
live person who's experiencing something
yeah.
that you're.
It's wild. Yeah, if you've never gone to the symphony or seen like an orchestra play, it is similarly impactful. Like just the way that it moves your body and the way that like you're experiencing it with a bunch of other people is actually kind of like probably the most similar
And
thing I
just the
can
way
think
the
of.
sound is moving in the space, like it's different when it just comes from a recording. I think the way that it moves around you in
Yeah.
the space, and
Well, it's waves, so there's so
Yeah.
many more waves than what have gone through the little filter of the microphone and back out through the little.
plus
Just-
it's like a thing. It's a moment in time. Like that's why I did my thesis project the way I did for grad school in art and design. Like it was a moment.
Yeah.
It was an evening. Like it was an event.
was an
Like, it was
experience,
an experience,
and then it was over.
Then it was over because like I love that.
Did you get it?
Because that's what life is. I mean, it's a vapor. It's like, I mean, relatively, it's kind of just like an eclipse. It's like, boom, now it's over.
Yeah.
But that's what life is, and I think to jump on the opportunities of like, hey, let's enjoy this and experience this right now is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, what I was struck with, so there was a full solar eclipse when Jesus died, and it's recorded in all the Gospels. I just checked it this morning. I'm not going to read them all.
nice.
I marked them all, but I'm not going to read them all. But they all say the same thing. So at noon, the whole country was covered with darkness, which lasted for 3 hours, and that's about how long it took. It's not darkness for 3 hours though. It's
The lead
starts
up,
to get dark,
and then
it gets
totality,
darker.
and then-
and anyway, it's but it's
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Mhm.
So maybe it was a different phenomenon, but people are pretty sure that what they're referring to is a full solar eclipse.
Oh, interesting.
There was also an earthquake, and it gets pretty crazy. I'll just read this. At noon, the whole country was covered with darkness, which lasted for 3 hours. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out a loud shout, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why did you abandon me? Some people standing there heard him and said, he's calling for Elijah. One of them ran at once and took up a sponge and soaked it in cheap wine, put it on the end of a stick, and tried to make him drink it. Others said, wait, let's see if Elijah is coming to save him. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain hanging in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks split apart, and the graves broke open, and many of God's people who had died were raised to life. And they left the graves, and after Jesus rose from death, they went into the holy city where many people saw them. When the army officers and soldiers who were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake and everything else that happened, they were terrified and said, he truly is the Son of God. Interesting thing, the only gospel that records something different as to what Jesus said out loud is John. And John is often referred to as the one that Jesus loved by John. So John had a pretty high opinion.
He was in touch with God loving him. That's awesome.
But all of them say that he cried out and then died. But John cries out. John says that what he said is, it is finished. So I guess John was close enough to hear what he screamed out loud. Because the rest of them just say he screamed out loud and then he died. But John says...
after he says, Eloi, Eloi.
After he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then he says something else.
So, it's right here. Jesus knew by now that everything had been completed, and in order to make the scriptures come true, he said, I am thirsty. A bowl was there full of cheap wine. So a sponge was soaked with wine and put on a stalk of hyssop and lifted to his lips. Jesus drank the wine and said, it is finished, and then bowed his head and died. So he's the only one that recorded
I love how they all agree
different.
that it was cheap wine.
Yeah.
They
all agree that it was cheap wine.
They couldn't even hear what Jesus shouted, but from however
They're
far
like,
off
man.
you have to be, they're like, that is
Yeah.
some cheap wine.
What was my point?
I'm sorry,
well,
we
those
distracted you
are
with
a
the
couple
wine
of different things. Like one, the curtain is so important. So the curtain, I think we've already talked about it, but the curtain in the temple separated the presence of God from the people. And there was only one person, the high priest, who went into that space one time a year, and he had to go in with a rope tied around his waist, because if he died because he was not worthy of being in the presence of God, they had to drag him out because no one else could go in to get him. So it was and this was all like codified. Like this was what was told to Moses, to the people, like, this is what you're going to do on this day, the Day of Atonement, I think. I don't know. But on one day, the priest is going to go in and sprinkle, and he had to do all these ceremonial cleansings before he went. And it was like basically like driving home the point, you are not worthy to be in the presence of God. And unless you do all of these things, you'll be struck dead by the presence of God. But if you do all these things, you can come in and sprinkle blood on the mercy seat, which is the top of the Ark of the Covenant, one time a year, and then you leave, and that's it, and you don't go in. And so this space exists that represents the holiness of God and the separation that exists between God and people. But all of the gospel accounts, except for John, record, or did John say it too? That when Jesus died, the curtain was torn in two. And I've read various historical accounts that talk about the curtain, and the curtain was not a curtain like you would think. It's actually like many layers of fabric. It was like 12 inches thick, and so it was, it was no fluke. It tore, and that was the end of the separation between God and humanity, because that was the end of sin. That was the end of judgment, because God took all of judgment, all of it, on himself. Like, God codified what was good and what was evil, and codified the penalty for doing evil, which was death, and then took the penalty on himself in that moment. And then the opportunity for creation, for humanity, to commune with God directly was immediately available. That's the thing that you will hear in some Christian churches, but you won't hear to its fullest, truest extent taught many places, because a lot of churches are businesses and they need to keep people coming back. And one of the ways they keep people coming back is by making them feel like participating in their services kind of help them get right with God. So if you tell them that God already did everything that's necessary for you to be with him, it's going to be hard for them to get you to come back and
I'm
put
sure
money
there's
in
a
the offering
psychological
plate.
term like insecure attachment, or like a some sort of
Yeah, like
this relationship where it's like, you are shameful, and the only way for you to be accepted is to keep coming back.
Yeah,
and
You
we're
are
gonna keep
shameful, but
making you
I
feel
forgive you.
guilty. And
yeah,
we're
we
the
forgive
way
you,
of, like,
God forgives you, but there's like a penance. There's always been this
Yeah.
this human impulse towards penance, which is like trying to pay for your sin. You can't pay for your sin. Like the monks and all throughout Christian history, there's this thread of people trying to like whip themselves or
whip other people.
feel really horrible, or just existing in this like eternal state of horrendous shame.
Yeah.
And that's the exact opposite of the gospel, like the exact opposite of
Good
what God
news is
did.
that
The
it's
good news is
not
that God
how it
took
works now.
all sin and shame. So you can find Christian communities that teach that, but it's hard to find them that teach that and then don't kind of subtly get the shame angle
But also, you should do the right thing.
back in there somehow. So, but anyway, I was really struck by the fact that, that the people watching Jesus die on the cross were experiencing this, really,
Darkness.
really intense phenomenon. Yeah, this darkness, this which.
Well, and I wonder too, like, because volcanoes and earthquakes go together and they spew out stuff that can make you
True.
make
It could.
darkness
I think I've
happen.
heard some people say that there could have been a nearby volcanic eruption that blotted out the sun in conjunction with an eclipse. Maybe.
Or the earthquake. I mean, if
or the earthquake.
there was.
Yeah. So we don't know it was an eclipse, but that's what I was experiencing when I saw the eclipse. It would be neat if it was.
Yeah.
But it was really cool. So one thing that we can do nowadays, not we, our family, but can be done with computer models, is you can actually, the celestial objects moving in the sky are on totally predictable schedules. I mean, you can know when all the eclipses are going to be for the next 1,000 years, because even though our calculations might be off by a tiny fraction, they're totally predictable. And one guy was like really excited about trying to figure out the Jesus's birth, and he spent a bunch of time studying this, and he made a documentary called The Bethlehem Star, The Star of Bethlehem, or whatever, Rick Larson. And some people have come out and said that his research is bunk or whatever, and this is always going to happen. People find something, other people are going to poo-poo it. But what I think should be easier, because there's a lot of debate about what the Bethlehem Star was. It moved in a very strange way. It rose, and the wise men followed it, and they're all going on like lots of shreds of evidence and but what should be more conclusive, though maybe not now that we just talked about it, like maybe it wasn't a solar eclipse, but with the star maps and with the computer programs, you can absolutely see whenever Jerusalem experienced a total solar eclipse. It's easy to do. And so there was a total solar eclipse in Jerusalem at about 33 or 34 AD, which would have been right around when Jesus would have been crucified. So there's a clip, and we'll put it in the description, but I might show a little bit of it, or maybe I won't. We'll just describe it and put the link in the description. But there's a couple of really cool things about it, but one of the coolest things is that he explains that while on Earth, what you're experiencing is the sun and the moon and the earth, and so the sun is blotted out by the moon but if you're on the moon, well, not really on the moon, if you're on the other side of the moon, uh, looking back at Earth, what you experience is uh, basically the shadow.
Wait, I thought what
You
he
see
said
the
was there was
shadow?
a lunar eclipse. Hold on.
Maybe
I
we should just
watched
watch it.
this video.
I didn't see it before.
What I thought he was saying is that there was a solar eclipse from the moon.
Here,
from the
it's only
perspective
2
of
minutes.
the
We
moon.
can watch it real quick.
Now I'm going to show you guys
Here,
something.
let's see if I can
It's
just
one of
switch
those
this.
things that just they really affect me. I have to admit. I mean, I get the prickle on the back of the neck. You know, sometimes these things put me in tears. Maybe they do you too. I don't know. I want to show something now that's going to make you just marvel at God. I want you to picture in your mind the geometry of a lunar eclipse. It's not really very hard. You just have the sun and the earth and the moon, they line up. The earth gets between the sun and the moon and blocks the light. Okay, so they're lined up. When you look at a lunar eclipse from Earth, the moon gets dark. But if you were to go to the moon and look back, what would you see? You'd see the Earth coming between you and the sun, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd see a solar eclipse, wouldn't you? Okay, because that's the reverse. So I'm going to do something now that I think you'll find interesting. We're now on the moon. You're standing on the moon, you're looking back towards the sun. That's the Earth. I want to show you now the moment of Christ passing on the cross. That's 3 p.m.
Oh no.
That's Aries, the paschal lamb, the ram, the constellation Aries, at the very instant of Christ's death.
Maybe.
They show it
Show you
again.
again.
Okay, good.
He is expiring right now. In the heart of the ram, just put out.
Can you pause it?
Jesus, your paschal lamb.
Yeah, so I have a few
Oh,
I have a
sorry.
few questions
Totally
about
messed
that
that up.
because I don't think it wouldn't have been a lunar eclipse because it was the middle of the day. So that seems odd.
Well,
like
sometimes
from
the sun is in the day. The moon is in the sky during the day.
right, but a lunar eclipse is where the Earth's shadow covers the moon. That's what a lunar eclipse is. You're
Yeah.
seeing the moon eclipsed.
Yeah, but
So
if you were
anyway-
on the other side of the Earth, you could be experiencing.
Something else.
I have more questions now that I just watched that. But his point was, and I think that maybe somebody watching this might get inspired to get this computer program that allows you to rewind and forward the celestial objects. But his point is that from the moon looking back at Earth, the sun was blotted out because they were all in alignment, and
Then you could see the stars.
the black circle of the sun being eclipsed was right in the center of Aries, which is the constellation of the ram, and Jesus is the Passover lamb. Anyway, there's a lot of foreshadowing and what's the word? There's a lot of
Prophecies?
Synchronicities.
prophecies and prophetic foreshadowings about the Passover. The Passover, if you're not familiar, was when the Egyptians were keeping the Jewish people enslaved. Moses came, said, "Hey, God wants you to let his people go. The Hebrews, he wants you to let them go." And Pharaoh's like, "No." And Moses is like, "All right, well, I'm going to do some signs to show you that God's serious." And he does all these signs. And then eventually the last one is he tells all the Israelites to paint the blood of a I think it was like an unblemished, like 1-year-old sheep or lamb, and paint the blood on the doorposts, and like the angel of death would pass over any house that was marked, but the first born child of every household that wasn't marked with the blood of the Passover lamb, that child died. And like it didn't matter how old they were, that was like the firstborn child. Anyway, it was but there's lots of foreshadowing there, but the big one being like the blood of the lamb covers you and death passes over. And anyway, really cool. but kind of like the eclipse, like we said, like all this stuff, there's like a mountain of stuff to dig into and figure out what's true and what's not. But the neatest thing to me is that like God's revelation to every person is totally personal and
Yeah.
specific to you. So like I don't know what's going to convince you. I don't know what God's going to say to you or what evidence God's going to show you, but like throughout my life at various times there's been really impactful things that God's either said or done or shown me that have had just basically undeniable impact, like just like things that I just couldn't otherwise explain. And that's going to be totally personal to you. But one thing that I wanted to point out and is really neat, and I'm going to link to it in the description, is one of the other things about religious institutions is they're very interested in creating, you know,
Rules.
I was gonna say traditions. They're
Yeah.
they're really into
I think
tradition.
God likes traditions too.
But one tradition that persists to this day and is kind of odd because it's so blatantly wrong is the idea that Jesus was crucified on Friday and was resurrected on Sunday. And over, Jesus explains that he's going to die and be in the grave. Well, he calls it the sign of Jonah because Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. And in fact, really early in his ministry, he says, I will give you no other sign except for the sign of Jonah, and that I'll be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. And but if you just do some simple counting, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's maybe you
Simple
could technically
counting.
call that 3 days, but there's no chance you can call that 3 days and 3 nights. So Aaron Budjen, who
Getting a hotel reservation.
yeah. So Aaron Budjen, who we've talked about before, and I'm sure you've heard us talk about, but we'll put a link to one of his teachings. Is called "Accounting for the 3 Days and 3 Nights," and it's really, really interesting.
So fascinating.
The reason it's
it's like fascinating just because of how the Jewish people like had to experience the death of Jesus.
well, that's what I was gonna say. That's
Yeah.
what like one of the coolest things to me in the entire gospel account in the scriptures is what I learned through this series from Aaron, which is, so, the Jewish people have Sabbath, and on the Sabbath, there are very specific rules. You can't buy and sell, and you can't leave your dwelling. There are very specific rules about how far you can travel, et cetera, et
What
cetera.
you can carry.
And what you'll learn if you watch if you listen to the 4 programs that make up the teaching on the 3 days and 3 nights, is that what was confusing to modern day people when you read the gospel accounts is that they keep talking about the Passover meal. And what Aaron explains is that at that time they were using the word Passover meal for both the Passover meal and the very next day, which was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a totally different God-mandated holiday, but it's also a Sabbath. So I don't want to try to explain it. You should just listen to it. But what it essentially means is that by law, the Hebrews had to come to Jerusalem for the Passover. If they couldn't, they had to do it a month later. And if not, they were essentially kicked out of the nation of Israel. Like, it was very serious. You had to kind of get permission to not be there. Like if your wife was giving birth, or you had some kind of catastrophic thing going on, you could make it up the month later, but you absolutely had to be in Jerusalem, which is really interesting because that really wouldn't have been possible for the nation had it gone on much longer, because like
A lot of people.
the nation was getting bigger and spreading
Yeah.
out anyway. But all that ended in AD 70 when the temple was torn down anyway. But what I think is amazing is essentially the bulk of the nation had to be in Jerusalem for Passover, which was the day that Jesus was crucified. And because of the way the Sabbaths line up in the year that Jesus died, he was crucified on a Thursday. Friday was a Sabbath because it's always a Sabbath. The day after Passover is a ceremonial Sabbath. It's called like a high holy day. And then the very next day was Saturday, which is also their seventh day Sabbath. So they had to be in Jerusalem on Thursday because they had to bring their lamb before the temple in order to get it blessed, or like, yes, this is a good enough lamb, you can use it for your. So they had to be there Thursday. They had to be there Friday. They couldn't travel because it was a Sabbath. They couldn't leave on Saturday because it's also the Sabbath. 2 Sabbaths in a row.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday, Jesus rose. So everyone was in town. It was so public. It was such a public declaration. Not only that, they saw the eclipse, or the blotting out of the sun, where they felt the earthquake. They saw dead people get out of the grave. And then they heard
the
that
thing
Jesus
ripping.
is not in the tomb. And Aaron goes to great lengths to explain that, like, the Jewish people knew, the Jewish religious people that were trying to that were having Jesus killed, knew exactly what Jesus was saying. I am going to rise from the dead this many days later. And they even went to Pilate and asked for extra guards to guard the tomb, because they were like, his followers are going to steal the body and then circulate rumors that he rose. So like there's nothing in the writings following Jesus's resurrection where the Jewish people refute or claim that Jesus didn't do what he said he was going to do, which was be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. So Aaron goes to great lengths to point out that like their society was really big on specificity. And if he had only been in the grave 3 days and 2 nights, they would have been like, no, that's not good enough. That doesn't count. Even though if he rose from the dead, they still, because
I mean, is it everyone or is it just Aaron?
their culture though believed that you weren't fully dead until 3 days.
Oh,
so
okay, so that's a big
was
deal.
he was
Yeah.
proving,
Yeah.
because people, back then they could be in a coma or whatever and wake up. So you weren't really pronounced dead until it was 3 days. So he wasn't rising from the
Interesting.
dead
Yeah.
until it was 3 days. So all those things, I mean, if any of those things are new to you, research them more. And it's just so cool to me that God proclaimed things in the heavens, that God made sure that the entire nation, or at least the vast
Most,
majority of it,
yeah.
was in the vicinity of where Jesus was, wrongfully tried, executed, and then rose from the dead. And he was seen by hundreds of people. Like the all the gospels say that like he was seen by 500 people, and he appeared over multiple days before he ascended. And I don't know how many days. I don't know if that's clear, but like anyway, it just kind of speaks to God's heart and his way of communicating. First of all, if your experience with church is primarily one of shame and guilt, I just want to encourage you that like those are institutions that are not involved in teaching the truth. Those are institutions that are involved in power and manipulation. And those are the most easy to find because that's how they make money.
And not that they don't want good things for you, but that's just not what Jesus has for you. Like I think what Jesus has for you is real freedom.
From
Instead
everything.
of feeling the shame. Like, so I'm doing my master's in education and I'm taking this class on discipline right now. So I've been reading this week. We were looking at, because we're studying different people who've come up with all these theories. And it reminded me of The Art of Possibility. I think that was the book that I read years and years ago. And basically it was this couple and they were both professors, I think. And they were like, okay, everybody gets an A. Like beginning of the semester, everybody has an A. Like there's no, you don't have to earn it. You just come in and you can lose it if you,
If you try hard
You
enough.
don't do well in your
yes,
assignments.
if you're like not doing anything, then you can lose it. But like you have an A. So but the guy that I was reading about today, he was like, don't do anything punitive. Don't do anything punitive, and don't do anything
Rewarding.
no rewards.
Yeah.
No rewards and no punishments. Like there's no incentives for behavior. It's all intrinsic instead of extrinsic. But I think that's kind of what Jesus provides, right? It's like you can have it if you want it. Like it's available to you. you don't have to like try to earn anything, and you aren't gonna like lose it if you don't do a good job.
Yeah.
Like it is
It's not
already yours, and you don't have to take it.
Yeah,
But it's already there for you.
It's
You
not
want it.
behavior based. It's not behavior based because it was in the old covenant. Your behavior was being observed, and there were all these things you had to do to atone. It was either a dove or a ram or a sheep or whatever. But that's what people don't understand. That whole relationship between humanity and God ended the day that God died. The curtain tore. All
Because the lambs weren't really cutting it.
the lambs weren't really cutting it. They were foreshadowing. They were a symbol of what was to come, which we shared, I think,
Yeah,
last
the
month,
sacrifice
where
every
God
year.
said when he was talking to Joshua back in like Zechariah or whatever, he was like, in one day, I'm going to deal with the sins of this land. Like in one day, it's going to be done. And it is done. And you might be like, well, then why does every church talk about sin and guilt and shame and all these things? But if they are talking about things, those things, I hope they're talking about them in the context of no one needs to experience them anymore because they are a thing of the past.
Well, and you just have to ask yourself, like, does God want me to dwell on sin? Or does God want me to dwell on goodness and beauty and love and like all like whatever, where is it in Hebrews when it's like whatever is good, whatever is pure, whatever, think on these things. Like if you're dwelling on your sin, then that's exactly what God does not want.
Well, I think it's like, I feel like this comes from like the meditating on shame and your sin comes from this idea that if you are no longer ashamed or no longer in a deep state of fear, then you will do terrible things. And though this is true, I think that
No,
is,
but like when you're stressed out and fearful, are you
no,
really
no,
doing
yeah,
the right
yeah, yeah.
thing?
No, but you will eventually mess up. But I think the fear, there's this psychology thing that's like you can't break a habit by thinking about it all the time.
Right. Don't eat the cookies. Don't eat the cookies. Don't eat. All you're
Eventually
thinking
you're
about
going
is the
to
taste.
break. And the only way to break a bad habit is by essentially one, not thinking about it, which can be really hard, especially like it's
Replacing it.
you have to replace it or you
Yeah.
have to like love it away. Because
And I think God knew
yeah,
that. God
like-
was like, I have to do this loving act. It's the only thing that's going to
Yeah.
lead to joy and freedom and
Yeah.
peace in the like.
Well, and I think it leads to a deeper like understanding of I think it leads to a deeper understanding of self-love, but also like the reason you can love yourself is because you don't have to pay that price anymore. Like
Right. There's
You-
nothing for you to hate anymore.
yeah. And I think when you can actually love yourself and when you're when you're secure, then you don't need all the things that lead you to
Sinful behavior.
Yeah. So I think one time I was sitting in Bible study. I might have already told this story, but I really like it. I was sitting in Bible study one morning, and my friend was sitting next to me, and one of the questions was like, "So what is sin?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I got this." And I was like, "It's the 10 Commandments," and the leaders were like, "Okay." And then my friend answered, and she was like, "It's anything not done in love." And I was just like, oh my gosh. I love her so much. It's, yeah, and like you can't do something.
If you're living in fear,
If you
you're
can't-
not going to be able to
Perfect
do.
love casts out all fear. So if you are no longer afraid, then you can just let the love like flow through you and have it inside you. And then what are you going to do? You're going to like
Who
be
knows?
fulfilled. You won't need all the things that.
But what you're not going to do is make bad decisions because you're fearful.
Yeah, that's just like, I don't know if she still remembers that, but that's never ever left me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think what God has for us is joy and delight and, abundance.
Yeah.
and not fear and not dwelling on evil and
Mm.
all these things that people think make them righteous, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I've really processed over the last few years is that God is infinite and I think doesn't have a great grasp on how humans view time. And so God's story arc is extremely long.
Some would define slowness.
And so I think that's totally reasonable. Like I've definitely had people bristle at that assertion. Like I've had people be like, don't say that God doesn't understand time. What I'm saying is that God doesn't understand exactly how it feels to be a human and experience time. Because if you look at the scope of, you know, Adam and Eve being created and living in perfect communion, in pure oneness, and in perfection, and then choosing to rebel, choosing to you know, put themselves
Live in judgment.
over what God wanted. Yeah. And then like by some estimates using the genealogy, those really boring books in the Bible with like numbers, they like literally list the years that people lived and the generations all the way to, and then the very first thing in the book of Matthew is also a genealogy of Jesus. So it's like you can do the math, and it's, you know, roughly 4,000 years from Adam to Jesus.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's a long time. I mean, you know, when God
There are
told
some people
Eve,
who lived a really long time, though. Anyway, go.
but there's that's a long time. Like when God told Eve that, you know, a child would come from her body and he would, you know, crush the devil, like that, you would think that would be in your lifetime, not 4,000 years later. Like that's a long time. And so what I'm getting at is like God's conception of time and the story arc that he's weaving can be really difficult to kind of put in perspective, but like it's a love story. Like God was like, I love you,
It's long.
but I value your autonomy. I value you having agency and making decisions. And then I'm going to take care of the sin thing, but I still value your individuality and your agency and your decisions. Like you don't have to be with me. There is a place that's been prepared for the devil and his angels, and that place is a horrible place. And they talk about weeping and gnashing of teeth and all of those things. But like, there's now no physical reason why you need to go there because your sin debt is taken care of. The only reason you would go there is if you don't want to be in the presence of God. And he's never been in the business of forcing people to do things, and he's not going to force anyone to be with him. So that there's still a choice, even though the sin debt has been taken care of, there's still a choice to reject the free gift of forgiveness. There is still that choice. So, you
Well,
know,
it's not. I wouldn't say it's just forgiveness.
restoration.
Because you already have the forgiveness.
You have the
You already
forgiveness.
have the forgiveness. What you're accepting or not accepting is
Restoration
Yeah.
of the spirit of life. That's talked about.
And
Yeah.
essentially, God as an entity, I guess.
I think it's God as God. So like the primary thing that happened when Adam and Eve chose to eat from the fruit that they were told not to was that they were God. They were like, don't tell me what to do. Like I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And you still have that choice. You can pretend there is no God, or you can pretend that you're just as good as God, which is what Satan's deal was, or you could say there's no God. But like regardless, like in order to understand the story arc that God made, you have to let God be God, and you can't be in his place. You can't be in his judgment seat. But like anyway, we should wrap up. But basically, like see an eclipse. It's amazing. Study the scriptures, but just know that like, you know, if you've had a really crappy introduction to the story of Jesus dying on your behalf, and it's been all tangled up in guilt and shame and behavior modification and manipulation, like that's that's not the story. And the devil is very much real and very much active in the world. And I think manipulating God's words has always been his deal. Like the first thing the devil does when he comes on the scene is twist God's words just a
Oh,
tiny
he
bit.
uses them.
And so it should be really obvious that that's still happening, that the story that God's telling is being manipulated and is being tweaked just a bit to nefarious ends. So that's what's still happening. So, but there are tons of people who have connected with the truth of God's incredible love and God's unbelievable selflessness in incarnating and dying for everybody's sin. So
Wait,
I don't want to like make it seem like it's hard to find. It's just hard to find in giant institutions.
yeah. Okay, 3 things. Let me see if I can remember them all. Dad made this super great Easter video years ago,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and it's hilarious. I love it. You should go watch it.
I'll put a link.
I think it's just about like announcing Sid is dead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
but it's
book.
great. Second one is
Well, I didn't make it. We all made it. You guys
we all
made
made it. We helped put the flowers in Dad's lovely
I-
You were the
hair.
talent.
I conceived
And-
of it,
And then
and
I think we
executed
did
it.
a Peeps.
And you were the director.
Yeah, there's a Peeps stop motion animation.
thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description.
And the other thing is, like what you were saying, I value your autonomy and your choice. Like that is like a perfect example of like what even what secular sources say is like that's how healthy relationships are. Like you value each other's you value each other's autonomy. You
yeah.
will do what you will do, and I will do what I will do, and we're gonna figure out how this works.
And you're not
I
manipulating
think
or
that's
making
one,
demands.
And when you see like churches being like, "This is what you're going to do," that is the exact opposite of that. It's like that's an unhealthy relationship. If you consider it like
If you accept that as a
relationship, it's like
you're submitting
you
to
need
an
to
abusive
do all
relationship.
these
Yes.
things for me so that I can love you, which is not a healthy relationship. So I think one way to like see if something is true is to see if you actually like the end result or like how it works out in your life.
Yes.
So
And does it truly align with
yeah, if a
the
god
greater
is
purposes?
if a god is theoretically good, then why would he relate to someone? Why would he relate to people in a way that is clearly abusive or manipulative? Like that doesn't line up. So I think that was one thing
But
that
that's
struck
a
me.
lot of people's. That's the basis of a
Yeah.
lot of people's understanding of who God is.
Absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
abuse and manipulation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And like I will not interact with you unless you blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Like it
Yeah.
couldn't be more opposite. It's
Yeah.
they
Yes.
talk about like that in the end days that they will call evil good and good evil, and that's
Yeah.
like basically exactly what I see happening in the world.
I mean,
Wait, that was
hasn't
only
happened
2
before.
out of
Yeah, do you
3.
have
I'm
another
trying to
one?
remember the third one.
What did
It was
relate
something
to?
small. It was something I thought of after the other two. I don't remember. I did have a thought. It was about the Sabbath, but it
Oh.
wasn't like a part of. It was a thought I had way earlier, and then it was different from the one I just thought of now. It was just a question about what were the rules that were the hedge laws that were created by the Pharisees, and what were the actual rules of the Sabbath
Yeah.
in the Torah?
Yeah.
I don't.
I don't know
I
them
mean, we're not
offhand.
probably gonna,
You-
like,
yeah, you
answer
can
this-
you can read
this,
them,
but-
they're there. But
Yeah.
you'll learn a lot about what the laws were about the Sabbath if you listen to that series that I talked about, accounting for the 3 days and 3
Yes.
nights.
Yes.
Because Aaron goes into reading the laws associated with Passover, reading the laws
It's
associated
a
with
lot of loss.
the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is always the very next day after Passover. Interestingly enough, Passover itself was not a Sabbath day, and it couldn't be because you were busy getting ready for a Sabbath day the next day. And then in the case of what happens every once in a while, which is what happened the year Jesus was crucified, is you're getting ready for 2 Sabbath days in which you can't. Now, I don't need to explain it. Just go listen to it. It's really, really neat. But it's all there in the law. And Aaron is he's hilarious, but he's basically like, if you just would read the law, like, it's here. If you would just read it, it would, it'd be easy to figure out. But anyway, whoever's watching this, we love you. We hope some little shred of this has meant something to you. I mean, the thing about all of this, the world, creation, God's love for us is so vast.
Yeah.
All we're doing is like, it feels like just like, throwing like, some water in the ocean. Like it's just so vast, but we're doing this out of a genuine impulse to try and share the joy that underpins our existence and the truth of God's love and forgiveness and mercy that creates the healthy way that we interact with each other and the way that we understand the way that God made the world. And we just feel like there's a lot of noise out there to the contrary to what we have come to understand is true. And so we want to make our tiny noise.
We vote for freedom.
Yeah, we want to testify to what we have found to be true and what God has revealed to us. So this is our effort to do that. So anyway, love you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye. How do I end this?
I know, it's